Welcome to my capstone. So I'm going to take you through the genetic variation and the preferential bias for language learning. So to put this in layman's term, the preferential bias for language learning describes how our genetics can influence our propensity to learn language and how well we can acquire new language. So before we even get into that, let's talk about why language learning is very important. So UF alone has 6,000 international students from over 130 different countries. And while most of us who would choose to learn another language would choose because of employment opportunities or travel opportunities, there's actually very significant neuropsychological benefits. So, for instance, a higher cognitive reserve, better executive control, and better overall cognitive performance, as well as the preservation of brain structure by preventing neurological aging. And these structural brain differences are implicated in impacting our ability to have executive function and control over our mental processes and our decision making and our higher order functioning. So some of the genes that are responsible for language learning, this is definitely not a comprehensive list, but it's just some of them, are ASPM and microcephalin that are responsible for dictating linguistic tone, which is the pitch for grammatical emphasis, as well as DRD2 and COMT, which both target cognitive flexibility with language production and executive function, respectively. FOXP2 comparatively is involved in speech and language processing as well as speech production. And BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is responsible for plasticity and learning and our ability to be cognitively flexible and acquire new pieces of information, new skills, and establish new connections. And this is especially with KIBRA or WWC1, which is implicated in improved memory performance and increased neuroplasticity or flexibility. So some specific SNPs are implicated across these genes. So for example, in ASPM and microcephalin, these listed SNPs can cause the upregulation of maintenance during the development of language areas in the brain. And COMT and DRD2 establish dopamine expression in the prefrontal cortex and allow us to focus more and have executive control over our brain functions with acquiring new skills. COMT is also responsible for creating new white matter tracks and creating new connections across the brain. And FOXP2 is also responsible for this, but more so in the language areas. And mutations in FOXP2 that are loss of function result in apraxia, which is a disorder with speech function and language comprehension. COMT, BDNF, and KIBRA all work together to influence plasticity and our ability to form new associative connections and improve our memory performance. So here we can see that when encoding information, bilinguals engage much more of their brain than monolinguals. And while not to the same extent, bilinguals also use more of their brain when executing novel instructions. And a big part of this debate is the difference between nature and nurture. So while genetic variations can result in individuals with varying innate propensities for language learning and being able to acquire new languages, Smith argues that rather language acts as a selection pressure that operates on the genes encoding for language capabilities. And proficient communicators are more likely to reproduce, and they then pass on their proficiency for language. But the language learning decline is a very, very real thing that impacts all of us. So our grammar learning abilities are preserved until roughly 17 years old and then decline steadily, as you can see in these two graphs on the left. And there are some suggested underlying neurological mechanisms for these, such as worsened working memory performance, diminished plasticity, and the influence of previous knowledge. And